welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be going over some of the things that people are saying when it comes to the genocide in Gaza and just how illegitimate they are. And so this is based on a Twitter thread by Dan Kervick. And so he starts off by saying, "I'm losing my mind. It seems so hard to get through to some people. I know and he's not talking about crazed Zionists. They are always the same. He's talking about the zombified normies who seem incapable of grasping and responding to what is happening." And so this is something that we really do need to talk about because people do not have a clear understanding about when they need to take a moral stance on various topics and when topics you just can let go and say maybe something like agree to disagree. So let's see what he says here. So he starts off with, "I'm worried Israel doesn't have a plan for the day after." I've heard this a lot. So I get through a lot of news shows because I typically listen at about 3 times speed because I just can process that information a lot faster. I've trained myself to do that. And so I've heard a number of people on these various news channels, various political commentators, geopolitical analysts, that I'm worried Israel doesn't have a plan for the day after. Well, here's the thing. What comes after the genocide? They've already wiped out, by their own estimates, 1% of the Gazan population, which would be roughly equivalent to the death of 3 million Americans if we're talking about 1 million or 1% of the American population. So that'd be 3 million Americans. So they're wiping out huge swaths of the Gazan population. We know they're targeting civilians. They've explicitly said that. They've targeted journalists. They've targeted UN workers. They come out and say this quite frequently. We have a ton of data, a ton of evidence. Their own atrocity propaganda has not been working. It's been refuted in a number of cases. Even people who are typically Zionist supporters are very confused about what's going on. I was listening to Breaking Points, and there's this one girl on Breaking Points who's very pro-Zionist, but she said how ham-fisted the propaganda out of Israel was these past few months. And so, yeah, I don't know what they're going to do because their reputation was ruined for eternity at this point, because this conflict is different than prior conflicts. And sure, they've been doing this for 80 some years pretty much to the Palestinian population, to other people of the world. The Zionists have been doing this. It's horrific, horrific stuff. But because of the decentralization of media and the proliferation of media across the entire world and the internet, we just have far more access to this. And it feels far more real to see near real-time footage of the atrocities that are being committed. This is horrendous, horrendous stuff that we've not seen since World War II. But you have some people who are pretending like there's going to be a day after for Israel. I will tell you explicitly that there is a lot of people who previously believed in a two-state solution who now think that Israel has no right to exist. So when we say, I'm worried Israel doesn't have a plan for the day after, there is no day after. Okay? At the end of this conflict, either Palestine is not going to exist and Western hegemony, the unipolar world, is going to have won, or Israel is not going to exist and the unipolar world would have lost and the multipolar world would have won. That's not something I'm stating as my own beliefs. I'm stating that as a prediction of the outcome of this situation because it's become really an existential crisis at this point. But let's move on to the next one. I'm worried this is going to backfire and lead to further radicalization. When you see these images and you see the vast amount of support that the Palestinians have, I don't know how it could not lead to radicalization. I have talked about this in other videos. I definitely feel like this conflict has radicalized me more than anything I've seen in other conflicts, because in the Ukrainian conflict, I think what the West is doing is atrocious, it's horrendous. But even if it's conscripts who have been forced into the war, it feels different than direct civilian casualties, unarmed people being murdered in large quantities. And we know definitively in like a month, Israel killed more civilians than Russia killed in the entire Ukrainian conflict for nearly 2 years. So it's so different what's going on right now in the Gaza genocide. It really feels so different. And it's radicalized people. It's radicalized not only the Palestinians, the Gazans, but it's also radicalized the larger Arabic and Muslim worlds. And it's radicalized me as a Christian person who doesn't have historical kind of blood ties to that area, to the Gaza population. So this has just been, yeah, it's obviously going to radicalize people. So Dan Kervick says in this post, yes, terrible, evil radicals who might radically try to protect their people and loved ones from genocide. So yeah, that's the radicalization that we're talking about right now. It's radicalization against the Zionist control of the Western world, and because the Western world has been dominant throughout the entire world, the Zionist control of the world. Yeah, it's radicalization against that, and I do think that people have definitely been radicalized in that way. Dan Kervick then says, another quote, it's irresponsible and childish of you not to vote for Biden just because you disagree with this one policy issue. Okay. There are policy issues you can agree to disagree on, like charter schools. Like, okay, it's charter schools. I mean, we can agree or disagree on whether charter schools are a good idea. We can agree or disagree on homeschooling. We can agree to disagree on any number of issues. I'm blanking on something. We can agree to disagree on the benefits versus harm amount for things like marijuana usage versus nicotine smoking, things like that. There's at least some degree of disagreement there that is allowed, I think reasonable. When it comes to something like this, where it's very clear genocide, where journalists in Israel, politicians in Israel are talking about wiping out the entire Gazan population, I don't think this is what frustrates me sometimes. People don't know when you should take a moral stance on something and when it's just one policy choice you can agree to disagree on. This Gazan genocide is not one policy choice. This is a major, major deal. It affects the life and death of millions of people. Okay, so you have to realize you need to take a principled stance here. Okay. So Dan Kervick goes on to say, yes, because as we all know, there are many, many things worse than the policy of genocide. What if there is another debt ceiling crisis, for example? Yeah, so obviously what he's getting at here is there are some things you can put aside and just vote for a person on. There are other things you cannot put aside and just vote for a person on. Okay. When it comes to pretty much both current President Biden and former President Trump, both of them are pretty pro-Zionist, and they're willing to support, it seems like at least, they're willing to support genocide in Gaza. And so, yeah, I would not vote for either of those candidates, and you can't expect people to vote for either of those candidates. So calling it a disagreement over one policy choice is a ridiculous overstatement. It doesn't show the nuance of some choices being more important than other choices. So going on, it talks about, I'm worried this overreaction might undermine long-term support for our friend Israel. Dan responds with, yes, what if the voters make us stop sending money to our friendly genocidal friend and they aren't able to carry on with friendly ethnic cleansing or commit another genocide later? So yeah, I think among younger generations, support for Israel is going to stop. Like when the baby boomer generation dies off, there is not going to be a majority support for Israel in the United States anymore. And it really does come down to everything wrong with America comes down to the American baby boomer generation. I'm at least somewhat sympathetic because they're the first generation that dealt with being inundated with a ton of different propaganda from things like the television, where it really did seem real. Like when you would get propaganda news or you get propaganda movies, it felt real. But younger people are more resilient to that type of media and entertainment propaganda. And so they're never going to trust Israel again after this. The Anti-Zionist coalition is huge. But I should mention there are other aspects of propaganda that I think younger generations are more susceptible to. It's just in terms of media and entertainment, they're not as susceptible to it as prior generations. And another aspect of that is the fact that media entertainment nowadays is more decentralized. And so it's not just a few Zionist controlled corporations controlling 90+% of modern media anymore. So going on, Dan Kervick says, he has a quote here, some people are losing perspective and fetishizing this crisis like it's the only thing happening. I mean, when it's such a large genocide of children, innocent civilians, yeah, I think it's something that we should focus on. And I know for myself, initially it was like every video I wanted to make was on this conflict. And over time, I started to go back to focusing on other issues. But I have to remind myself, like emotionally, to not become desensitized to this, because it's happening on a daily basis. And us as individuals don't really have any way of stopping these things. But you should really stay passionate about this issue, because there are people suffering, millions of people suffering because of what's going on right now in this Gaza genocide. So yeah, I do have other topics I need to talk about. And this isn't the only thing going on, technically speaking, but it is, I would say, the most important thing going on, because it's taking so many innocent lives that we've just not seen since World War II. But anyways, Dan's response to this is, yes, despite the unprecedented pileup of children's bodies due to genocide, there are good things too. Gasoline is down a little bit, and hey, what about Taylor Swift? So yeah, that's pretty much my response as well there. So this last one, his quote is, you have to understand where I'm coming from. When you say freedom and justice for everyone in Palestine, I hear kill all the Jews. So his response to that quote is, yes, I do understand where you're coming from. For example, when people say re-elect Joe Biden, I hear let's commit more genocide. So that's a great comparison there, which is you can interpret what someone else is saying in whatever way you want. That doesn't mean that's the way that they actually want it to be interpreted as. So your interpretation might not be correct for their intentions, is maybe a good way of putting it. And so, yeah, I cannot see myself electing Joe Biden or former President Trump because of their deep-throated support for Israel. So this is just, this conflict, it really gets at me like nothing else has. So that's where I'll leave you with. This conflict is a propaganda war, the likes of which we've never seen. We're being inundated with a ton of propaganda. Social media influencers are getting bribed to support Israel. I hope that my viewers stay strong in terms of understanding that the West is controlled by Zionist forces, and they are trying to get you to support Israel as they committed genocide. Especially if you are a Christian, you should be against this. These are the same Pharisees, the descendants of the Pharisees that killed Jesus Christ. So I am strongly opposed to the rabbinical tradition that is descended from the Pharisees' tradition, and I will continue to be strongly opposed to it. And this conflict has, to a certain extent, yes, it's radicalized me, and I think it's completely justified that it has radicalized me and a lot of people around the world, especially a lot of young people. So if you found this video to be helpful, informative, interesting at all, please give us a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Rumble for more content. We do have one long-form piece of content posted every single day. Please leave us a comment in the comment box below. Questions, concerns, critiques, anything you want to say. I do read them, and I do try to respond when necessary. And tell a friend about our channel. We are obviously being suppressed in the algorithm. We used to get thousands of views. We upped our production quality. I got a lot more experience in this, but we're getting like single-digit views. I understand it's because I started talking out about Zionism. We do have ways of marketing things that we're going to be doing in the future now that I feel caught up on the things I wanted to get caught up on, and I feel experience in it. But if you do tell people through word of mouth about our channel, it would also be very appreciated, especially if you think it could open their eyes to a new perspective, help them to come up with ways to talk about these issues. We always value having more subscribers, more people engaged in these topics, because it's very, very important stuff that we're going over here. So thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.